So we have a ton to get to tonight. Ton to get to. This covers 10 chapters. So we're going to be in the book a lot because it does a good job of recapping. Like it'll do a whole chapter in a paragraph sometimes. But real quick, last week, and then we'll open up in prayer. Last week we met David. We had a ton about David. So we saw him as the shepherd boy who is privately anointed king by the prophet Samuel, but that's he's destined to be king, but Saul is still on the throne. We saw him defeat Goliath. He plays a harp and basically becomes one of his generals in his army. He marries Saul's daughter, and Saul's jealousy takes off. So we see the people, like just the common people, favor David. They're singing songs about him in the streets. We see his daughter, Saul's daughter, favoring David, not only by marrying him, but she helps him escape when Saul is trying to kill him. And then Saul's own son, Jonathan, favors David over his father and also helps him in an escape. So all this mounts up, and David ends up fleeing for his life from the king. So that was last week in a very small nutshell, and why don't we open up in prayer. Holy Father, I thank you for the day you've given us and the group of people who are able and willing to come out and study your word deeply and have some good discussions about it. And I just pray that you'd be with us during this time of study, open our eyes to things we may not otherwise see, and let it be a good insight into your word and who you are going forward. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Okay. If you don't know, we're on page 55 in the books, and we're going to be in 1 Samuel 21. But first, the opening questions. I don't know they're super relevant, but I think they'll be interesting to find out. When, if ever, have you been the victim of a hacker? Anyone?
Victim of a hacker?
Hacker, yeah, like a computer hacker. Yep.
We were at work and wiped out the company's entire.
Ooh. Wow. Yeah.
You had companies where their whole network was held hostage, and they wanted to be paid for it.
Really? Oh, wow. I didn't know that happened. That's interesting. Okay. Anyone else ever have that happen? No? Me neither. Now we know a few things about each other. That's interesting. And so maybe we wouldn't know this specifically, but question 2, so they ask, what parts of your life was the hacker able to control? Even if it's not you, what can they kind of get in control of?
Your personal information.
Like what?
Checking account, credit cards,
Mm.
Social Security number.
Birthday, extended card.
Yeah, the thoughtful hacker. Yeah. Okay, so the point that the book is getting to with this is that sometimes we feel like our lives have been hacked and God is no longer in control. But that's never the case. God showed David through years of fearful circumstances that he never lost control of David's life. David could humbly trust him even when he was running for his life. A bit of a stretch to fit that in? Maybe. But I was curious to see what people knew about hackers and if you've had any interactions with them. So we go on. But let's start in the text. We'll go to 1 Samuel 21. Okay, 1 Samuel 21. Remember, David has just started fleeing from King Saul. Verse 1, Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Now, if we recall, this is where the tabernacle is at the moment, in the land of Nob. So, the priest. David came to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king has commanded me a business, and has said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee. Secret mission. And what I have commanded thee, don't tell anyone. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. That's why they're not here. Now therefore, what is under thy hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread. Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what there is present. The priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under my hand, but there's hallowed bread. If the young men, who David claims are around, if the young men have kept themselves, at least from women? And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common. Yea, though we're sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, and there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdsmen that belonged to Saul. David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thy hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword or weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. The priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that. Give it me. Okay, so we have a odd, pretty drawn-out, deceptive moment here. When he comes to the priest is concerned that this general has just showed up by himself. He says, No, I'm on a secret mission. I'm definitely not running for my life. And my guys are over yonder. I'll meet up with them later. And he asks for bread. There's no bread except for the showbread. So first, a few questions. All of this lesson is really going to depend on what you think about the situations. And we don't like to be that gray when we're studying the Bible. However, this is one of those vague Old Testament type things, like in the book of Judges, where it's just presented without any moral impartation to it. The Bible just presents what happens and lets you deal with it. So how do we feel about what David is doing here?
So it's okay to lie from trouble. That's the moral.
Well, so that's the thing. It never says, and David did good. David, there's no moral thing put on this. There's no moral judgment placed on almost anything that is going to happen in these chapters tonight. How do we feel about some of this right off the bat?
Well, if you think more about it, maybe there's some reason David had to not trust this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he fabricated the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got right away.
Okay.
It was, why not just tell the truth?
Or he's protecting him because if he doesn't know, he didn't help him.
Mm-hmm.
Knowingly.
Yeah.
He may not matter, but
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anyone have more negative feelings about this? I'll tell you, I have strongly mixed feelings about David through these chapters here. So he lies to the priest, which is typically not the best thing to do. Now, there are extenuating circumstances. He also takes the showbread, which you would think would be a huge deal. Do we know what the showbread is? Are we familiar with this? As more than just a term? Okay, so in the tabernacle and later in the temple, the priests bake this special bread, and as you walk into the space in the temple, it would be sitting on your right. There's a table there, and they have 12 cakes of bread, and it's for the different tribes of Israel, and I believe it's called the bread of God's presence at different times. And it is I think it also symbolizes the manna in the wilderness, and it's a continual sign of God's provision for the 12 tribes. So it's it's a holy object in the temple. And he sort of says, well, the priest put these stipulations on it, like, well, have your soldiers, who don't exist, have they been kept from women for a few, like, is there any sense in which they are, like, sanctified? And he says, oh, yeah, no, for sure. So by that logic, we're sanctified, the bread's sanctified, it's cool. It's normal bread. I don't know how to feel about it. Any thoughts?
I'm the same way. Kind of confused.
Yeah.
Well, I need to replace it daily, right? I guess it carries kind of the end of the day, so.
Yeah. I think it's weekly. I want to say weekly, but I'm not sure. Kim asked how often they replace it. Is it weekly? Or is it daily? Yeah. I believe the priests are typically the ones who consume it. Like, it's not just handed out. But, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so either way, it's a strange situation either way. Like, I think you're supposed to feel a little bit uncomfortable with the whole thing, whether it's justified or not. And then, of course, he asks, hey, do you have a sword here? It's like walking into the church, like, do you have a sword I can use? Like,
He was going to cut the bread.
Yeah, with the sword of Goliath, he was going to cut the bread. Yeah, so the sword of Goliath shows up, and I have thought about that endlessly, not just with this lesson. I think there's something to the fact that he takes the sword of Goliath, his old enemy, and runs with it, but I haven't figured it out. Like, there's something there, and I can't put it together. I don't know what the meaning is, but there's something there. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 10. David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Do we know where Gath is, generally? It is over there. It's a Philistine city, okay? It's probably not too far from Nob, but yeah, it's a Philistine city. That's what's important. And verse 11. And the servants of Achish, this Philistine lord, said unto him, is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them and feigned himself mad in their hands and scrabbled on the doors of the gate and let spittle fall upon his beard. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see this man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So this is more of his ploy. He just kind of keeps doing one odd thing after another. So he runs to the Philistine territory, which he considers safe, at least from King Saul. He's killed many Philistines. They're not his biggest problem at the moment. So he goes there and he starts acting crazy. Okay. Chapter 22, verse 1. They are short chapters, I'll give him that. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam, and when his brethren and his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So he finds this gigantic cave, and he has this odd situation where he sort of gathers his merry men, like this whole band of malcontents flock to him. So even though David's hiding, he is not, I don't know how he's so public about this. Like his whole family hears about him. You have all these just general, like, brigands, like general, all sorts of, they describe all sorts of issues, and these men just kind of flock to him. And he goes to beginning of verse 3, David went thence to Mizpah of Moab. So he leaves that area, they settle in Mizpah, and you just have this whole thing going on. So he's got men around him, and they're just hanging out at the moment. Technical biblical term. Okay, so real quick, I'll explain what's about to happen, and we'll see the ending of it. So when David and his men go to Mizpah, this is the point where King Saul finally hears where David is and what's happening. He's gathering people to himself. So he sets out, and he finds out, his old buddy Doeg, who he met in the tabernacle, who was in that area, he told Saul, hey, I saw David down in Nob at the tabernacle. So Saul goes there, and he is furious with the priest. He said, the priest explains exactly what happened. Hey, it was David, he's your guy. He said he was on a mission from you. I gave him what he needed. He left. No, I didn't know anything about it. Saul doesn't believe him, and he tells his men, kill the high priest and everyone else. Now, his men refuse to do it. It's another situation where Saul isn't in control of his own army. So his own army, they won't kill the priests. Doeg, on the other hand, the Edomite, he steps up. He kills 70 or 80 people? 80 people? 85. Good catch. So, yeah, I think it's somewhere around there. So I think it's 85. I think you're right. So he kills just about everyone who's there. And then we see in 22, verse 20. So one of the sons of Ahimelech, that's the high priest, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests. David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life. But with me thou shalt be safeguarded. Does this change anything you're thinking about David at this point? Good or bad?
Well, at any point, is there any indication that this is what the Lord would have him do?
That's the question, isn't it?
Marginally, at least at one point, the prophet of Gad told him to leave and go somewhere, but that was about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's not a lot that I see. Now, we haven't been reading all the text. Not a lot that I see. At the very least, his deception cost a ton of people their lives. So again, whether he was justified or not, and it's still ultimately on King Saul, of course. But his actions had very unintended consequences downstream. So, yeah, it's not...
But it would have cost him his life anyway.
Possibly. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if you told him the truth, and Saul's still coming, and
Sure.
well, he was going to kill him for not stopping him,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way we're going to stop David.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the priest wasn't like,
Yeah.
Doug. I like to call that guy Dude, not instead of Doug,
Doug, yeah.
seems to work, He wasn't as whiny as Doug was, 'cause,
Sure. Yeah.
But I think, so it's still hard to say, I think.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, it looks like he's just running through the circumstances and whatever he's got to do to keep going.
Yeah.
And seem like he's safe. And it doesn't say it, but maybe, he's not praying, he's not,
Mm-hmm.
he's just reacting to each circumstance and he keeps going with it
Yeah.
to try to make sure he's safe.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, and we do that too sometimes. We get in camp and we're really, we don't pray too much, we just keep going through each step of the circumstance and just wherever we land and we keep going,
Until we think about it.
So start thinking about it and say, wait a minute, I should be praying or I should ask somebody for help.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a little
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, but doing that, he lost the lives of a lot of other people.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem like they held it against him. You know, whoever else is hanging around him,
Yeah.
was with him. This priest was part of that priestly family.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, the only place I can go is with David, or I'm done too.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they figured like, you know, it's just kind of like, this is how it happened, and this is what's left.
Yeah.
And it seems like the other people, because of their support, did the right thing. I mean, if it's just naturally, like, 'cause everybody flocked to him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it didn't help his hiding.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I mean? Like it almost, I don't take anything away from them because
Mhm.
they all loved him, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it still seems like you're on the tightrope.
Yeah, for sure.
Can we blame Saul? We can blame Saul for David's, can we blame him for his situation? Or can we throw it into David's actions too?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where there's a lot to go around. Like, Saul is, of course, the initiator in all of this. He's the reason David's on the run. He's the one who ordered the priests killed. But yeah, there's a lot of gray in what's going to happen, and it's not done. So just.
I was figuring it's a crash course in how to be a king. All these things just piled on, because you gotta learn fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely handling some new tough situations. Yeah, okay. All right. On page 58 of your book. All right, so Saul is still on the warpath after David. Probably at the top of page 58. Alerted that the Philistines were attacking the city of Keilah, 20 miles north of his encampment, David sought the Lord whether he should go against the Philistines. His officers urged restraint, but the Lord assured David he would be victorious. David and his men delivered the cities of Keilah and confiscated the enemy's food supply. When Saul heard of David's victory, he ordered his troops to attack him. David learned of his impending attack and ordered Abiathar to bring the ephod, the priestly garment which had been brought to him from Nob. David then inquired of the Lord what his next move should be. Through Abiathar, he was ordered to flee the walled city. So I think was this maybe what you were talking about, Greg? Or, oh, no, that was a different prophet. Yeah, so once again you have David doing Saul's job. So the Philistines are attacking a nearby city. David's on the run for his life, and he still, with his men, take the time to go and save the city from the Philistines. And then he's in this odd situation where he knows Saul is going to come. They're in this walled city. And this actually gives a little bit of insight into what God knows, or I guess we can put it that way. God knew a situation that didn't occur. So he said, what he says to the priest, he says, ask God, if Saul comes to the city, will the people give me up to King Saul? So the priest asks, and however the Lord answers him, he says, yes, they will give you up. So flee. So that didn't happen. Okay, it never got that far. You understand? Does that make sense? And God knows the possibilities. He knows the if-then type stuff, which is beyond just knowing what will happen. He knows what could happen in every possible scenario. So the text doesn't make a big deal about that, but that's just an interesting, God told him what would happen if he did this, so he didn't do, it's an odd, interesting look at God's omnipotence, I guess.
So is this the first time then, I don't know if he skips these days.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the first time then, at least since he first ran?
Yeah, it gets back heavy into him seeking the Lord in this, and it's victory every time. He has victory over the Philistines when he asks God about it, and then he successfully escapes when he asks God about it.
Because Pastor said earlier, if I heard you right, just because it doesn't say something in the Bible doesn't mean it
Sure.
didn't happen.
Sure.
Right, so he could have technically
Mm-hmm.
talked to the Lord when the whole thing started.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, so probably towards the bottom of page 58. While in hot pursuit of David, Saul learned of a Philistine attack back home, so he called off the hunt. David then moved across the mountains to Judah to En-Gedi on the shores of the Dead Sea. So we have yet another Philistine attack. This one is too close to home for Saul to ignore, and Saul and his army retreat and go back. All right. Let's look at chapter 24. Chapter 24, verse 1. And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David's in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way, where there was a cave. Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of the Lord, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thy hand, that thou mayest do unto him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privately. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. So just painting the picture, David and his men seem to be hiding in this cave that Saul wanders into. The euphemism of covering his feet seems to be a euphemism for relieving oneself, although there's a little bit of scholarly debate on that. Some people think it means to take a nap. So it's a euphemism. It doesn't mean what it says, so it's a little tricky, but it's used in Judges with that fat king Eglon as well. Okay. So David sneakily cuts off a piece of his robe. Verse 10, David reveals himself, and he says, Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord delivered thee today into my hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but my eyes spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not, know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in my hand, and I have not sinned against thee, yet thou hast hunted my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but my hand shall not be upon thee. It's very tricky dialogue. All right, thoughts on this? Is this what you would have done? Do you like what he did? Is it a weird move?
Seems a little odd because he's still stuck in the cave and Saul's got 3,000 troops outside. Saul really wanted to. It's like, all right, time to storm the cave and kill 400 guys with David and put an end to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a risk.
How big was that cave?
Yeah, now it doesn't say all the men were actually in there. Could have just been a contingent, but yeah.
I mean, he had a different outlook on it. He was even upset that he cut his throat.
Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't have the same outlook as David, and it happened to any one of us, and we've all heard stories and saw stories and things like that in general, literature. It's the coolest thing to do. You really, really mess with his head. By sneaking in,
Yeah.
you could have killed him easily. He knows that.
Yeah.
Sending a message sometimes generally.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing to do. It's
Mhm.
risky.
Yeah.
But he's upset about it, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of restraint involved here, especially for someone who is already a man of war. Like, killing another person it would not be a stretch, You know, he's already well trained in violence. And yeah, it's interesting that his conscience bothers him about what he did, and you really see, like, you think, you cut his clothing, that's really eating you up inside. And David, throughout his life, does prove to have some odd triggers. Like, there will be some interesting things that upset him along the way that sometimes shouldn't, it seems like. But yeah, you really, at the end of his speech to Saul, you see where his heart is at, that he has no intention of harming God's anointed, no matter how horrible he has been to him. Which I don't know how you do. Like,
He left vengeance with God.
He did. Yeah.
Because I think by now he already had the promise. He came somehow, something got worked out.
Right.
And he wasn't going, I guess he figured he wasn't going to be the one to work it out.
Right.
David was.
But it got his skirt, his robe, was that gonna be like an embarrassment to the king? Like, he goes out and is that, would it have shown like a weakness or something because you let him get that close to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it probably wouldn't have made him look good, you know. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Well, that's the whole cheerful thing about being a guy who did it. Like, just kind of like, if I was Saul, I'd have been scared.
Yeah.
Because message received, you could have killed me.
Yeah. Yep.
God still showing Saul mercy through David.
This is true.
God could have told David he had to take him out, but God still showed mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But it also shows the other people he's not out just for the title. Like, he's not just to be king. He's
Mhm.
following what the Lord wants him to do.
Yeah. Yeah, this move shows a lot of different stuff. All right, in your book on page 59, it's a short little, we're going to read a chunk here actually. 1 Samuel 25:51 reports Samuel's death, and that is about as abrupt as the Bible is with it as well. Samuel gets less than a verse for his death. I don't know why. He's such a main character, and then it just throws out, and Samuel died. 1 Samuel 25:1 reports Samuel's death and the nation's mourning at the loss of that great man of God. David, still on the run, moved his army to Maon, where he had camped some months earlier. This area was home to Nabal, a wealthy rancher. David sent 10 men to Nabal to request food supplies for 600 soldiers, but Nabal refused to help them, even though Nabal's herdsmen testified about the protection David had provided while in the area. Angered by Nabal's lack of appreciation, David threatened to kill him. Nabal's wife, Abigail, apologized for her husband's attitude, presented a generous gift of food to David, and requested that he not shed innocent blood. When Abigail finally told Nabal about her negotiations with David, Nabal apparently suffered a heart attack. 10 days later, the Lord smote Nabal that he died, from 25:38. Then, in accordance with the customs of the day, I don't know what customs those are, David took Abigail to be his wife. He also married a woman named Ahinoam. In the meantime, Saul gave David's wife Michal to another man. It's a strange little story, especially following right on the heels of him sparing Saul. He gets so it seems like he did this guy a solid, for sure, this Nabal. Seems like he was protecting his cattle as all this chaos is ensuing. He wants food for his troops. Now, food for 600 men is a lot of food. Like, that's not a small ask, per se. But either way, he gets so infuriated that he's about to kill this guy right after he just showed unprecedented mercy. Now, it's odd because, God vindicates him in a sense because Nabal dies 10 days later, and then he gives the wife a space of time, and then he marries her. He was so taken with her generosity, her wisdom in the situation. So David is now technically on his, after her, they mention another one real quick. He has technically 3 wives at this point, which just kind of get like sprinkled in there, like I don't know, you know. He had a few things. He had a sword with him. He got a wife. He got another wife, you know. Well, that wasn't his. Yeah, so Saul gives away his first wife. So Saul gives his daughter to someone else because David is no longer suitable husband material in Saul's eyes, I would imagine. But yeah, so you get that strange little story. And we'll actually keep going with your book for a little bit here. It's basically going to cover chapter 26. It starts with David and his men encamped 6 miles east of Ziph. For the second time, the Ziphites alerted Saul regarding David's hiding place. Saul pursued David more vigorously than ever and vowed to kill him at any cost. David, meanwhile, discovered Saul's camp. When Saul and his army commander retired for the night, the Lord put him into a deep sleep. Then David quietly slipped to Saul's side and removed his spear from in the ground near his head. David's associate, Abishai, wanted to kill Saul with one thrust of his spear, but David would not hear of such a thing. Taking Saul's spear and water jug, the 2 men crossed over to the other side. At a safe distance, they awakened Saul and his commander by shouting that the commander, Abner, should be court-martialed for his failure to protect the king. Saul recognized David's voice. David made an eloquent speech on his own behalf. Saul admitted his sin and called off the pursuit one more time. David and Saul never saw each other again. So one, it's kind of funny. Like, I think that's funny that he says, "Hey, your commander should be court-martialed for this." You know, I'm sure he didn't use that term in ancient times, but yeah, once again, like he's kind of playing with him a little bit. Like, there's a mixture of incredible compassion because once again, someone said, "Hey, kill him with his own spear. This is the situation," and he's once again absurdly compassionate. But then, yeah, I find that kind of funny, the way he wakes them up to alert them that, hey, I just got in and out, you know. It's like they're playing capture the flag, you know, and he's kind of mocking them, like, yeah, he's got that. So it's interesting. The first time he cuts off a piece of the king's robe, so he takes some of the royal garb, and then he takes Saul's spear, which, one, you're taking the king's weapon, that's a big deal, but like the spear was so instrumental to all of Saul's folly. He always has that spear in his hand. He's not a good shot with it, but it's always with him. That's the thing that he is using to like do evil on a regular basis. So he takes away the king's robe and his weapon, like almost part of his identity. I think there's something to what he took, and then he seems to have taken water, just because they probably need that. I like it. Spear's protection, water is life. I like that. And I think it's noteworthy that Saul tried to kill him twice with the spear, and then 2 times David spares his life. So I think that the fact that the text, and if you're thinking 3 times with the spear, the text says it in a funny way, but I think it's actually to highlight this point, is because the first time David's just playing his harp, and it says Saul throws the spear at him, and it says he eluded him twice. But you actually see the second time later. So it's kind of like not foreshadowing, telling you what's going to happen. Doesn't seem to be 2 separate incidents and then a third. So yeah, it's mirrored by how many times David spares his life. But question 11 in your book, what trouble might have come to David if he had taken the easy way out, if he had taken his buddy's suggestion? Yeah, it's not a great situation. What else could happen? Mm-hmm. Could be killed himself. Yep.
It's something you would have to live with.
Mm-hmm.
You never get away from.
Yeah.
Even time went by. It's always there. It's never going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody that didn't like it would certainly use that to their advantage
Mhm.
The pole, they can't deliver, anything,
Yeah.
He's got to rule his conscience and that kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you, and this is kind of off a little bit, but
Sure.
do you think that even though the army of Saul stayed with him, do you think they were still just not really trying too hard? I mean, how far could we have possibly been to shout at him,
Yeah.
talk to him,
Mhm.
and give this little whatever he did to him
Mhm.
speech?
Yeah.
That somebody in the army couldn't put an arrow through David. I mean, you know what I mean? He couldn't have been 100 yards away.
Yeah.
They would have never heard him. So are they even they're with them, but they're not trying?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just,
It never presents David's speeches as an indication of the army's ineptness or laziness or.
but wouldn't you think so if you really look at it?
Yeah, but think about like a movie. Okay, so there's a battlefield, and of course your main characters are going to meet in the middle, and there's going to be a showdown where everyone gives them space, because that's just how things work. No, I don't get the impression that they're not with him, at least for this. Sometimes they disobey his orders. That's happened a few times. But yeah, no, they never present David's ability to give a speech as the army's not doing their job.
But he talked to him is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
It just thinks that, I just think that they could have easily,
Sure.
it,
Oh, yeah. Well, and Saul calls it off both times. The times they actually interact, Saul doesn't do anything to him, even though he's been chasing him the whole time. Yeah, okay. Oh, and as far as what could have happened if he killed Saul, one, we don't know what would have happened to David's potential reign. Like, Saul had the kingdom taken away from him. David later is told that the kingdom won't be taken from him, but that's after years of him faithfully serving God. And also, we have the incredible advantage of reading it from a prophet's perspective, where we get the information that, like, oh, God wants David to be king. God has taken the kingdom from Saul. Most people don't have that. Like, no one around at that time, except for David's, probably his close friends, his people. Like, this is a political situation. David is, whether it's right or wrong, David's a fugitive from the law. And everything that David does makes it clear that what he is not doing is usurping the throne. Like a general who's on the run and then kills the king, he might end up being king, but that maybe not. That's a different situation than what's going to play out at God's hand. So it's worth considering. Okay, let's move on. All right, chapter 27. Chapter 27, verse 1. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Saul said that he wouldn't track him down anymore. He said, you know what, you're right, I've sinned. David could have killed him twice. I'll back off. David does not trust him to keep his promise. That's what's happening here. 27, verse 1. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in the coast of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. And jump to verse 7. And the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. And David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Gezerites and the Amalekites, for those nations were of old inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even unto the land of Egypt. And David smote the land, and left neither man or woman alive, and took away the sheep, the oxen, and the asses, and the camels, and the apparel, and returned, and came to Achish. And Achish, that's the Philistine lord, he said, Whither have you made a road today? And David said, Against the south of Judah, and against the south of Jehoramalites, and against the south of the Kenites. And David saved neither man nor woman alive to bring tidings to Gath, lest they should tell on us, saying, so did David, and so will be his manner all the while he dwells in the country of the Philistines. And Achish believed David, saying, he hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. Do we understand what's happening here? So David ran back to the Philistines. He takes all his men with him. He's given a small city that he builds up. It's called Ziklag. That will come up later. And he starts raiding, basically, these Gentile areas, these like the pagan Canaanite areas. And when he comes back and the Philistine lord says, hey, where'd you guys go? Where'd you do your warring? He says, back in Israel. We were raiding some of the towns along the coast of the Israelites. What do you think about this? How do we feel about David with these things?
It's not much different than the priest in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying something the same as their skin.
Yeah.
And it's sort of unclear if these were like friendly nations to the Philistines, but
Right.
they also say like they don't want, he didn't want them to tell
Yeah.
the Philistine boy that they were attacking them.
Right.
So they're friendly, but
Yeah.
It seemingly seems stupid to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But he probably did it because he needed the food and all the other
Mm-hmm.
things that he could, he wasn't set up to do this all on his own and farm and all that, so he had to do something,
Mm-hmm.
especially with that many people with him.
Yeah.
So I would think he did that almost out of necessity in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
because he needed.
Okay.
The Philistine guy is not very bright. No one checked anything out, and he got
Yeah.
you know.
Seems verifiable.
Yeah, what he did,
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't have internet, couldn't send out the drone, get a picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right.
I guess it worked, but once again, he's not being truthful, he's very deceptive.
Yeah.
But he's saving the life of all those people by taking the life of all these other people, using their goods and all that. So
Right. Right.
I'm not sure if I can't imagine him attacking other people is really the wrong thing, because God wanted them to wipe out the land started, but why the king was the wrong thing?
Yeah, I guess all those upgrades, they were under judgment of God anyway. Those areas, and they would.
Yeah.
Eventually, they're going to take it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe that, he's
Right.
through that, he's accomplishing some other things.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So the areas that he ends up going to destroy, it's stuff that Israel should have taken, like back in the conquest hundreds of years ago. So I don't get the impression from the text that David's like, I got all these men, what should we do? We should keep going with what Joshua and them couldn't take. Like, there's no sense in which he's saying, I'm going to do the holy work of God. He's doing some stuff that, again, you're kind of like, well, one, God never told him to flee, not that we see in the text. He runs into the land of the enemy and sort of starts acting like the enemy from how I take it. And that's why I wonder about the sword of Goliath. Like, now he's wielding the sword of the Philistines, in a sense. And he ends up back in their land. He ends up doing, the difference between the conquest of Joshua and just any random killing is is this ordered by God at this time or not? So David sort of ends up doing things that are, at the very least, morally gray, and somehow God's will is still done in the process. It doesn't seem like God told him to do this, but it's accomplishing his will from hundreds of years before. So again, it's a weird thing that what exactly do you make of it?
Yeah, because nowhere there's any condemnation of God.
There's nothing.
There's silence.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm Baptist, I don't like silence. I want something definitive, right?
Yeah.
I need
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like,
Yeah.
so you're creating a lot of tension tonight, I want you to know that.
Right. Good. Yeah. Okay. So, man, there's so much to cover here. I think we can do this. All right. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 28 with ghost stories. Okay. 28 verse 1. It came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go with me to battle, and thou and thy men. So they're going to attack Israel. The Philistine lord wants David and his men to come and fight against Israel. Verse 5. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. There's that trembling again. I said we were going to keep track of that. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that has a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said unto him, Behold, there is a woman that has a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself, and put on other raiment, and went, and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by thy familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. The woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul has done, how he has cut off all those who have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up for thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spoke unto Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? The woman said unto Saul, I saw gods descending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he's covered with a mantle. Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground, and bowed himself. Samuel said unto Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from you, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord has rent the kingdom out of thy hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow thou and thy sons shall be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Then Saul fell straightway all along the earth, and was sore afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all day, nor all the night. Ghost stories, right? Okay, so we're familiar with the concept of necromancy, at least in thought. I don't know. Are people familiar with that word? Is that a common enough, strange, biblical, occult word? Okay, necromancy, so calling up the spirits of the dead. She's known as the Witch of Endor, this woman that he goes to see, because God won't talk to him. The Philistines are gathering an army. Saul prays, and nothing. So he goes and seeks out this witch, some sort of medium-type person. Now, some people debate whether or not this was real. Like, some people think that there was a situation where either the whole thing was fake, or maybe she wasn't the one who actually had the power to bring Samuel back, because it says that she kind of like exclaims when she sees the spirit. She's a witch. The Bible talks like at length about things not to be involved in. So I think we kind of have to give the Bible its due, and like, if he says in the Bible, hey, don't contact the dead, that's not for you to do, then I think we have to take seriously that, hey, people can do this. Now, people can be charlatans, and frauds, that's also true, but the one does not discount the other. So as far as I'm concerned, I see this as whether who's actually in charge of the situation. The spirit of Samuel is there. He makes a prophecy that comes true the next day. He says, hey, this is what God's doing. Like I told you back when I was alive, the kingdom is no longer yours. He's giving it to David. You and your sons will die by the hands of the Philistines. Okay. Then we'll jump to... There's more I want to read, but we're running out of time. You know what? I think I'm going to save some of this till next week. I think we'll leave on a cliffhanger. The Philistines are right on the cusp of attacking. Saul has it confirmed. The kingdom is no longer yours. This spirit of Samuel has told him. I don't want to rush through what has to be explained here. So, any thoughts, questions? I know I just kind of brought you up to a weird witch and then just dropped you. So, anything you want to discuss of anything tonight?
Because even in the New Testament, you see that with Saul or Paul with his missionary journeys and condemning the magical arts and all that, evil spirits and everything. So how is it okay with this, and it's not okay in the New Testament?
What do you think's okay about this?
It's okay if this actually happened.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
About the Samuel
Mm-hmm.
and the witch.
Right.
You can't trust the witch is no good.
Right.
So that doesn't say a witch couldn't be honest and tell something truthful.
Mm-hmm.
But
You think it was actually Samuel?
I don't know. I still don't know. I'm almost 67 years old. I still can't. I don't know. If you take it at face value, then sometimes it's better just to do that.
Yeah.
It actually happened.
Oh, yeah.
But if it actually happened, does that create an issue today?
Why? Why do you think that?
See, I think,
You understand what I'm saying?
well, we may be on the wrong thought, but
You know what I mean?
I have a thought on
Yeah, where do you think the problem is? I don't see the problem.
Where's the problem? Well, then you can, if this is legit and this is what it was, how does that affect all these people that do all these mystical things today? Can do a seance, the tarot cards, read your palm, do everything, and then claim they're able to speak to the people that have crossed over. Even that Edwards guy who was on TV for years, and contact their loved ones and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you kind of mesh it all together? If you don't want to mesh it together, then what do you do with that? Maybe this is not the time for
Mhm.
it, because this is recorded to me. It's recorded like it's fact.
Oh, yeah.
Actually happened.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
You know what I'm asking?
Sort of. So I don't...
So how do we avoid it today and say it's not right for us as believers to go down and pursue this, even though this actually happened, and you have a Old Testament Christian coming back in spirit and
Mhm.
the message from God?
So your problem is that she brought back someone who
Yes.
is a Christian, to put it that way.
And it's a legitimate message. And it's
Oh, sure.
what God said.
Yeah. No,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, personally, I have no issue with believing that it's real. I mean, the Bible presents all sorts of supernatural happenings. There is extensive stuff about witchcraft, demons. In the New Testament you have, we were talking about it today, the Apostle Paul, he casts demons out of, a lot of them cast demons out, but then you have people who have demonic spirits that allow them to divine and see. Yeah, so as far as, I guess your problem is, he should be in heaven, technically? That's...
Yeah, but if you believe the Old Testament,
Yeah.
Then you get into that.
Yeah, you get into Sheol. Yeah.
So I'm not so sure about it.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying, how do we, this is legit, and this actually happened.
Yeah.
And if you read it, that's what it says.
Yep.
So why would we avoid it today as a believer? Why would we not get into anything like that? You know what I'm saying? Because we could leave Bible study tonight and say, well, if I didn't hear from God, like in 2 weeks, I'll go visit
Well, it's not presented as right what Saul's doing.
that.
Oh, is that all you were looking for?
That's where I'm getting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So you just wanted me to say this is bad.
No, I'm just saying, how do we?
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is presented as when God is not talking to him, he seeks a supernatural alternative. He seeks lesser beings. He seeks things outside of God's prescribed means of interacting with him or anyone. It's interesting that he brings up a prophet. Yeah.
Still says the consistent message. It's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yep.
He didn't get anything. He didn't get off the hook.
Yeah.
Nothing. Everything is going to be what.
Yeah, at some point in Saul's reign, he was with it enough biblically, like on the right page enough, that he had outlawed these witches. That's why she had that statement of like, hey, why are you asking me to do this? You know what the king decreed. We can't do this. He has an inside guy, though. So, he's, no, don't worry. I know nothing's going to happen. Wink, wink,
I think it easily shows that there's good supernatural and bad supernatural.
Sure.
And it was the same then as it is now. So as a Christian, because I don't know how I feel about Saul's whole
Yeah.
personage, but I think even back then you weren't supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should get involved with it now because I think it's just as real now as it was then.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a whole lot of fake going on. So, so I don't even think it's a choice. I think the thing I was going for was you seem to think this was a ghost,
Oh, I just said, yeah.
or do you think he was risen from the dead?
Oh, I consider it to be the spirit of Samuel as opposed to a resurrection.
Because the problem I had with the resurrection was, and again, we're going with, your life is gone here, you're one with the Lord.
Yeah.
So if he brought the body up, you could bring the body up, but then how would he be speaking through? Because he's not supposed to be in the body, he's supposed to be up with the Lord.
Yeah. To me, it seems to be some sort of spiritual manifestation of him. She mentions she sees gods rising out of the ground, and that can get very confusing, and I probably shouldn't have even said it because we don't have too much time to get into it. In Hebrew, Elohim, we hear that and we think, oh, I've heard God called that. Well, Elohim is a class of being. It's not a person. So like pastor is a job description, but then we call our pastor, we just call him pastor. Like the word pastor in and of itself is not a name, it's a job description. Just like Elohim is a being description, not an identity. So like God, so the word Elohim is used for what we know as God, who we know as God. Pagan Elohim, sometimes angels, darker spirits, and the spirits of the dead. So Elohim is technically, it's a class of being, and that being is anything that abides in the in the spiritual realm. So, God is, it says in the New Testament, God is spirit. The spirits of the dead, like anything on the other side, I guess you could kind of put it that way. So yeah, to me, it seems like a spiritual manifestation of some kind. Yeah, so ending on all these notes, we do have to get going. Anything quick you want to say? Okay, we'll pick up here next week because there's too much. Okay, so let's close in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this night. Thank you for your word. We thank you for even some of the more difficult, gray things where we don't always know what to think and how to judge. Holy men, we don't know always how to judge the acts of the wicked. But Lord, I just pray that you would allow us to sit in the tension sometimes and sit in the wisdom that it can create to line up what people are doing against your word and against your revealed will, and that it would help us to learn to follow you just more clearly in our daily lives. So I'd pray you be with us this week as we contemplate the study and bring us back safely next week for more. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right.